So today you get to hear from our first guy on the podcast. Let me give you a little backstory and then I'll properly introduce you to him. We're going to talk with Zach Lloyd today. He's a lifestyle anti diet coach. He emailed me after listening to an episode of Grief to Great Day, so he had my attention with that fact. But as we emailed and then met on Zoom, I was excited to share not only what he does with you, but who he is. I've said many times that after going through grief, I had little patience for small talk, superficial drama, and all that stuff. Well, I can also tell if someone has been through a little something something in their life because if they'll allow it, God will bring growth, maturity, and most importantly, a higher perspective. Well, that's what I saw in Zach. I want to bring you anything and everything I know that will help you in grief in all parts. You may be thinking, who cares about health right now? Well, even though I knew what to do when I was going through grief, I wish I had met someone like Zach back then. Someone to help sort out all of the stuff that's important and not important. Someone to encourage with the understanding of how hard it can be to get out of bed, and someone to keep me accountable. He's been through hard times, which has shaped who he is. With 2020 hindsight, reflecting on my grief journey, I strongly encourage you to listen to Zach and check out his website. It's zachlloydcoaching.com. If I had put my energy into walking or even lifting some weights back then, I would have gotten through grief with one less thing to deal with now. All these years later, I would have had more energy and felt stronger walking through grief instead of turning to junk food for comfort. Oh, to feel any sense of strength or control in grief. That would have been a great way to do it. If Zach had been in the picture, my journey could have been physically better. And because grief is a whole body experience, my physically stronger body would have affected my emotions, my thinking, and yes, I believe my relationship with God. Now, Zach is kind and he cares about people, so I recommend you check him out. You know, I don't promote many people in this podcast, but what I'm promoting is of great value to you in your journey. And as you build a new identity, why not let it be a stronger version of you? Now I'm going to properly introduce you to Zach. Zach Lloyd is a sustainable anti diet coach. He gives credit to God's grace, basketball, and heavy weights in saving him from nearly losing his life to drug abuse. He's been coaching for over a decade, building skill sets in every area associated with physical and mental fitness. He is driven to help others find meaning and fulfillment in suffering through fitness. Grief to Great Day has never had a guy on the podcast. You're
All
our
right. Yes.
and yes, it's about health, but it's also about the hope that you
Yeah.
bring because of who you
Yeah.
are.
So, yeah, I'm Zach Lloyd. I'm a sustainable anti diet coach. And I've got here through a lot of different ways, but overwhelmingly started with just being a complete dirtbag as a young man in my teenage years and early 20s, and no idea what I was doing. And I was trying everything of the world, and I was not getting any results from it. And so ultimately, I got into drug dealing. I was into drugs. I was hooked on Oxycontin for a while. And by the grace of God, I was saved and transformed through that. And ultimately, I found working out to be one of the most prolific changes in my life to get through that time. And what I realized over time was working out slowly started to prove to me that if I showed up and I pushed a little more and I pushed a little more and I got through a little harder of a workout or a harder rep and I did one more rep when I really didn't want to, I started to realize that I was really in control of my life, and I couldn't be a victim anymore because I realized if I did one more rep in a squat or a bench press, that I didn't want to do that rep, but I did it anyways. And doing that over and over and over again with working out kind of slowly taught me that. And it really rewired my brain because there was a lot of, drug abuse before that. And ultimately that drug abuse just like laid me out and made me just really like, oh, poor me, poor Zach. My life hasn't been how it's supposed to be. And ultimately I was able to realize, well, that's because I'm not making great choices and I need to make better choices. And then all of a sudden you start making a little better choices. It becomes this snowball that starts rolling down a hill. And long story short, I got really passionate about health and fitness, and one thing after led after another. And people started asking me, Zach, what are you doing? Like, your body's changed, your life's changed. And I thought I was going to be a physical therapist for a while, but ultimately I went back to strength training, personal training, because that's really where I get meaningful fulfillment. And it's not just showing people how to do exercises, it has transformed into just lifestyle coaching, is what I like to call it, because I'm going to train a doctor very differently than I'm going to train somebody that's a shift worker. I've worked with countless women over the years. Just that's been who's gravitated towards me the most. So I would say 70% women, 30% men. So I really understand, probably more than the average guy, some of the struggles women go through from younger years all the way through middle age. And then I have some older clients too in their 70s and 80s,
Love it.
and really seeing those changes take place over time. And what does it look like to live a fit and healthy life that is sustainable and is not focused on short-term fixes or diets or things that are only going to have some comfort in the short term, and in the long term are going to cause you a lot more pain and harm. And that's kind of where I'm coming from.
You kind of described my life, not the drug stuff, but everything after that. So was it when you were growing up that you turned to drugs?
So I was bullied a lot in middle school and high school, and that made me really question who I was, and I really had no sense of identity at that point. And I really just felt like I was, less than, or basically worthless, or I had to prove my worth in some way. And so long story short, I kind of didn't really get too dug in with school, because I would always ask, why are we doing this? Or why? And I would never get a really good answer. So if I wasn't getting a good answer for doing something, I had no desire to do it.
Yeah.
And that's what kind of pushed me into this. Again, it's kind of like that stereotypical, well, you get in with the wrong people. I don't know if I fell in with the wrong crowd necessarily. It was more of, we kind of gravitated towards each other because we were kind of the outcasts because of X, Y, or Z, or we were bullied, or we challenged the status quo, or what have you. And ultimately, those people that became, close friends over those years, looking back in retrospect, it's so obvious that we all just had some, whether it was self inflicted trauma or trauma from somewhere else, it didn't really matter. We were all dealing with traumatic things in our lives. And that's what I find so fascinating, is the perception that we have as humans is everything. So the lens we look at life through is going to determine the outlook of our life and how we react and feel about it. And as, middle school kids, high school kids, young adults, if you're looking through that lens in a very dark and bleak way, then you're going to get to the conclusion that, what is the point of showing up in life empowered and giving and having like a servant heart? What would be the reason to do that? There is no reason. And so that's what kind of led me down that road of, well, what is there to do for fun? And it's basically like, how can we just entertain ourselves to get by? Or how can we have fun to just get by and pass the time away? And that's, I think, where a lot of people get into drugs, alcohol, or any of those riskier behaviors or criminal activity. I really have a hard time believing that we just like have people with dark black hearts. I think there's a
Right.
slow progression that gets them there. And I think that's exactly the path I was on. And like I said, I was just a complete dirtbag, you know what I mean? And so that's where it really came from.
And how, like, was it a moment that you had an encounter with God? Was it like a slow progression, like seeds were planted and over time it happened? How was that for you?
Yeah, so there was definitely some seeds that were planted over and over again, but I didn't really answer the call during those times. And one of those times was, again, which is so crazy looking back, is I was in my car, extremely hungover, from OxyContin use, and there was no more pills at that day. Like, you couldn't ask anybody in the entire town that I knew to get any more pills. I had to go to work, And so I was driving to work and I was just in shambles. And I used to listen to a lot of rap and hip hop music. And so Eminem was playing. And one of his songs that really struck a chord with me in a very special way that day was Not Afraid. And it talks about through no matter the weather, through the storm, we're going to get through this. And for whatever reason, that song spoke to me in such a special way that after that day, I knew that if I kept using, then I would be lost to the world much sooner than later. And I had to make a change. And so I never went back to Oxycontin after that day. And I wasn't saved that day or anything like that. That's just a pure miracle of God's grace and mercy on me that led me to be saved in the future. And ultimately, taking great faith was the key piece where my aunt, who's always been, and I quote, spiritually evolved, had a very special relationship with her for a very long time, but really no reason why. And now I understand it as it's just the Holy Spirit, God brightly shining through her and always has been. And I was always like, she's just different than people that I've met before. And she challenged me one day and said, hey, you need to pray and ask God for help. You're clearly, I just got to quit a job. And I was like, I don't know what I'm doing with my life. I'm not doing drugs anymore, but I sure as heck don't know what I'm doing with my life. Like, it still doesn't feel like I'm going anywhere. And she said, ask God for something, ask him to show up in your life. And I believe he will show up in your life. And I remember looking up into the ceiling at my house and kind of that's where God lives. He lives in the
Yeah,
ceiling
always up.
and always up. And I was just like, hey, if you're real, you'll get me this job that I'm not qualified for. And I wasn't qualified for the job. There was no way that I thought I could get that job, me personally, at all. And I was like, oh, yeah, you can do anything, God, like prove it to me. Right. And I'm not saying this is how God works,
Right.
but this was the circumstance for me. And I kind of jokingly threw up a prayer. And in 2 weeks, I got a phone call and I got the job. And I was blown away. And I said, yeah, like, okay, I guess I have to follow through on my word. I'm going to follow you for the rest of my life and I'm going to learn more about who you really are. And I moved out to where the job was, where my aunt was located. And I was able to stay with her for a while until I got on my feet. I got the new job. And it's just been passionately pursuing Christ ever since.
What a story. What a story. But what I love about God is he will use things that are very specific to you and your personality, like that Eminem song.
Oh,
Like
100%.
that was for you where you were at the time and said what you needed to hear.
Yep. Yeah.
So cool. And your aunt, I mean, you didn't say that she hit you over the head with a Bible. I mean, I had a friend once that threw the Bible at me, literally.
Literally. Oh my goodness.
Literally. And I was like, come on. But
Yeah.
passion was there. But I mean, your aunt was just throwing out the challenge and probably knowing your personality like that too, saying,
Yes.
maybe. That's awesome. You said a couple of things that I love, like you didn't know your identity. And in general, I think women try to get their identity from other things. And sometimes it can be a lack of boundaries. I'll speak for myself. Like you want to help the whole world, but you're not supposed to help the whole world. So you end up not helping yourself. And then in
Yes.
grief, you lose your identity because a part of a very big, important part of your life is now gone. So you can't just tomorrow continue on as you were. You have to find a new identity. And that's one of the hardest parts. And I think that's where health, fitness, strength come in. I think physically, that's very important, emotionally, and even spiritually. And we'll get into that more later. But I love that you brought that up because that's so important. Another thing you said was like you were the why guy. Well, I was the why girl in grief. Like,
Yeah.
why, like a year and a half at least just hammering God with questions of why would you do this? Why would a good God do, that kind of thing? I
Yeah.
need to understand things too. But you had to do, like you said, one more rep, all the things you don't really want to do, but you do it anyway. That is
Yep.
grief all day long. There are things you really don't want to do, and you don't feel like you should have to because your life has been blown up. But you really have to do those things sometimes. Sometimes you need to rest and do nothing, but sometimes you really need to do that one more rep. You need to reach
Yeah.
out and you need to get help and everything. So it's like all those things are wrapped up in your life, and it's a really cool story. And I think that's what like shone through when we were talking through email is your heart and passion for Christ, and how you're able to help people at a very practical and needed level. It's not the short term yo-yo stuff that, that's how I grew up, that's all I knew. It's the consistency, it's the showing up, it's all that. And through your life, you've done that. So share where you are now. Are you married? You got kids, all that good stuff.
Yeah, yeah. So married, gonna be going on 9 years here. Really fast, time flies.
Yeah.
And I have a 4-year-old daughter and an almost 2-year-old son.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
interesting years there.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, it's
Same
it's
busy, right?
wild chaos all the time, but man, I love it. And especially since my daughter turned 4, it's just wild how fast they grow up. And everybody says that, but until you're a parent, you actually, feel it and see it. It's a totally different thing. But they're the biggest gifts next to my wife in my life. I couldn't ask for anything better.
And what kind of redemption? Like God has totally redeemed your life,
Oh
and
my goodness. Yeah.
now you're impacting others, and what a blessing. What a blessing that you're actually doing that. Not everybody
Yeah.
would, but
Well, I think the other thing too that I've learned is, like you said, the redemptions piece is for the longest time, I was not interested in getting married. I wasn't interested in having kids because I just didn't see myself in the light that that would be helpful to my life. I was a very selfish view, but it was also the fact that I didn't feel like I was prepared for it and I was ready for it or I would be good at it. And the remarkable thing is that those feelings and those thoughts were not from God in the slightest. And it's just so beautiful to see the sanctification process take place of you get, married, you get all of this extra responsibility, you become one with somebody else, and then you start to have kids, more responsibility comes on top of you. And all of these things are challenges, and sometimes there's suffering involved, sometimes great suffering involved, but those are all used for our good. And I didn't see that before, and now I can see that. And now it's like when the challenge comes or the suffering comes, there's a little bit, I'm still a human, I'm still not enjoying it, but there's a little bit more of an inclination to prayerfully and faithfully show up and say, God, I know this is for me, and this is only going to increase me, and I will learn from it. And whatever it looks like, no matter how bad it is, I'll get through it. And that's a huge mind shift from where I used to be.
yes.
And I really find that that's one of the things that empowers me the most in my day to day, because I will never forget how worthless I felt. I will never forget how small I felt. And I also know that I am not special in the slightest bit. I'm just as ridiculously human as everybody else. And if I can do it through God, then anybody can. And I believe that so passionately that that's one reason I love coaching so much, is because I can help people push through some of those thoughts or feelings or emotions and help them realize that they're just as able as I am, and I'm not special, therefore they're not special, and we can both do it together.
I think that's the thing right there, is getting to the point where you can. Before, when I read "Be still and know that I'm God," I'm like, what does "be still" mean? Like, aren't we supposed to do something? What do we have to do? It's all about the doing. That's really not about the doing at all. It's about the trusting, the acceptance, the knowing, and God, you are sovereign. Your plans are really. I'm not just saying it. Your plans are better than mine. Like in the worst of times, your plans are better than mine. And I think, in the last couple of years doing Grief to Great Day, what I've seen are there's like two groups of people. One, me, who had more religion when I went through grief, when I started going through grief. I had more religion. I was rule based. I was, action oriented, goal oriented. And I viewed God as God, but not of my life. And
Mm,
when, he did the thing he shouldn't have done, it was on. And I
yeah,
was so mad.
yeah,
Like coming to a place of acceptance and coming to a place of true reverence, not religious reverence, but true reverence that takes the weight of the world off your shoulders, And it's a struggle. It is a struggle. I've also seen a different group of women, very much not like me, who had that kind of relationship with God before grief. And their
Yep.
grief is no less painful, not at all. But the way they push through is different. There's more
Definitely.
reliance, there's more the suffering you're talking about. We're all going to suffer. I mean, we're all living a human life. We're going to suffer. How do you want to go through that? I think that's the
Right.
question. And
Right.
we've watched the Tour de France, and they're like, "Oh, Mark Cavendish is really suffering right now." I'm like, "That ain't suffering, but it is." I mean, it absolutely
Yeah.
is. It's pushing through when you can't go anymore. It's taking, one more stroke on the pedals or one more step forward when you don't want to do it, when you think you have nothing left to do it. And I think that's why it's so important that you're here. If people are wondering, why is this guy on Grief to Great Day? Because you're going to help people get through this suffering. You're going to,
Yeah.
I don't know, you're going to impact them in a different way than any of us can. And that's because that's how God has built you. And I don't doubt that, your demographics are mostly women. You're cute. So, and you're really kind. And your heart, I think your heart is what shines through. I think what you saw in your aunt, people see in you. There's something different. I mean, I don't think you have to preach. I think there's just something different, a light that people, they want that. They want hope. They want a different life. They don't want to always be the victim or feel like it.
Y'all, we all need hope, especially in grief. We need examples of people who have gone through really hard times and come out the other side. When I was going through grief, I searched out examples of those kind of people to give me hope. Now, if you're thinking, yeah, that's them, but it's not me, well, then you're definitely in the right place because I said that more times than not. I thought God would work in their lives and not in mine because I had been so disrespectful. Thankfully, God is not a respecter of persons. I want you to listen on Tuesday for part 2 of Grief and Health: How to Make Great Changes with Small Steps, sharing Zach Lloyd, lifestyle coach. He'll tell you what really works when it comes to getting healthy and strong. And it's exactly what it takes to get through grief. And it will surprise and hopefully relieve you of some of the pressure you may be putting on yourself. Remember, you are not alone, and God still has great plans for you. If you need a church home, visit my church, opendoorchurch.com. Keep on coming back to the house. Keep taking steps, one more rep, one more step toward healing.